Every parent loves to see their child happy, as their playful, rambunctious self.
Awesome!
When they're healthy, that's all possible. With appointments available at Seattle Children's, your child can get the compassionate care you expect when they need it. So if your child needs specialty care, make an appointment today. Because safe, timely care can make all the difference. Hope, care, cure. Seattle Children's.
I would say, honestly, that the heart would be serving the individual person and looking at them in that clear way, and that what is it that they need? How can I make them better today and help set them up for success in whatever it is that they're going into tomorrow? If that means we need to slow down on a concept, make sure that it's understood. I just think that it's really just serving the individual in the way in which they're going to succeed, I think is the absolute heart of how this program runs and what makes it really, truly so successful.
Every parent loves to see their child happy, as their playful, rambunctious self.
Awesome!
When they're healthy, that's all possible. With appointments available at Seattle Children's, your child can get the compassionate care you expect when they need it. So if your child needs specialty care, make an appointment today. Because safe, timely care can make all the difference. Hope, care, cure. Seattle Children's.
I would say, honestly, that the heart would be serving the individual person and and looking at them in that clear way, and that what is it that they need? How can I make them better today and help set them up for success in whatever it is that they're going into tomorrow? If that means we need to slow down on a concept, make sure that it's understood. I just think that it's really just serving the individual in the way in which they're going to succeed, I think is the absolute heart of how this program runs and what makes it really truly so successful.
Hi, good evening. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's Parent Ed Talk, Saving Our Girls, Conversation Strategies for Parents and Teens, featuring Dr. Korslund, Chief Clinical Officer at THIRA Health. And I am really looking forward to hearing from Dr. Korslund tonight. My name's Elaine Sulkin. I am the proud mother of 3 pretty adult children and the bubby to 2 little ones under 2. And I had the great honor to actually participate in Dr. Marshall Linehan's UW Family and Friends DBT class many, many years ago, and got to see the intensity and dynamic of DBT personally. So we are really excited to have Dr. Korslund. After receiving her doctoral degree from the Medical College of Pennsylvania at Hamilton University, Dr. Kathryn Korslund completed a postdoctoral fellowship under the direction of Dr. Marshall Linehan in the Department of Psychology at the University of Washington. Dr. Korslund was a research scientist and the associate director of Dr. Linehan's research and training clinic for 16 years, providing clinical training and conducting research to further develop and evaluate DBT. Dr. Korslund joined THIRA Health as a clinical director in 2017 and is presently the chief clinical officer. Dr. Korslund is a board certified behavioral and cognitive therapist, the founding president of the DBT Linehan Board of Certification, and is a clinical faculty member at the University of Washington. For those of you that are not familiar with ParentMap, we are a content-rich resource for parents supporting you on your parenting journey. We like to frame the content that we provide, ranging from broccoli to popcorn, we'll say, broccoli being the talk we're having tonight, education, health, wellness, and development, and the popcorn is more in the fun, out and about adventure space. We are proud to publish free print magazines. We have a very robust website. We have published several books, and we hope you'll check out ParentMap.com. And we just want to cover a few housekeeping rules. Today's webinar will be recorded so that everybody who registered will have access to the recording if they couldn't show up tonight. We also invite you to put in any questions along the way that we will bring to Dr. Korslund at the end of her talk. And of course, we could not be doing this without you, busy parents, showing up and supporting our virtual events. We really appreciate it. A special thanks goes to our presenting sponsor, Seattle Children's Hospital, and also to live sponsors of tonight's event, Child and Teen Solutions, KNKX, Pacific Medical Centers, and Dartmoor School. So thank you to our sponsors. And again, welcome Dr. Korslund.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you, parents, for coming. This is such an important topic. And what I know about parents is that parents care and parents want to do the best they can for their kids. So I'm delighted that you're here. I have an ambitious plan for tonight. And as we get rolling, I do want to highlight just a couple of things that, I work in DBT. I work in DBT as a research scientist, contributing to the known literature about DBT, why it works, who it works for. And so I receive funding for that. I also do DBT clinical training and consultation. And then in my primary position here, I do receive salary support. So I always like to let people know about any potential bias I may have. So tonight, as I said, I have an ambitious program. I've got several objectives. I want to make sure that we're all up to date with what is the latest of the problem with suicide for our girls. Talk about strategies to guide families in talking openly about suicide, highlighting strategies for teens and families to increase effective coping and crisis management, and how to identify resources and take actions. Suicide is a complex problem, and we won't be able to cover all needed information tonight. So I hope that if nothing else, I get you started on your journey and that you have an opportunity to learn more to really support the youth that are in your life. Suicidal behavior, there's a variety of terms, and it's important that we all have an understanding as we launch into tonight's talk. Suicide, meaning death caused by self-directed action with some degree of intent to die. What's important for all of us is language. And like so many things in our culture, language changes, but language matters. We want to try to avoid things like committed suicide or completed suicide or successfully completed suicide, because those words have a positive connotation most of the time, that you're committed to a goal, or you've completed something, or you're successful. And instead, we're going to try to stick with words like died by suicide. Now, you will notice that probably as we go, I will screw this up. So you also don't need to worry about being perfect. It's just an aspirational objective that we're all trying to change in the media, in the science, as parents, how we talk about this particular problem. Suicide attempt is a non-fatal self-directed action, and there may or may not be any kind of harm for somebody, but there is an action with an intent to die. Suicidal ideation is thinking about suicide, considering it, planning it. There's a continuum there when we talk about suicidal ideation. And suicide communication. Suicide communication can include very clear, expressed statements about suicide. You know, I'm thinking about killing myself. And it can include indirect hints. I want to go to sleep and I never want to wake up. It could include verbal behavior, as in the examples I just gave, and it can also include nonverbal behavior. Maybe somebody writes a suicide note, or you observe them collecting and storing and hiding pills. And then lastly is non-suicidal self-injury, or we shorten it with NSSI. And this is behavior that's self-harm without intent to die, but nonetheless is harmful. And the behavior may have different functions. It might be to relieve distress. For many people who engage in non-suicidal self-injury, examples are cutting, burning, headbanging. It often has a self-soothing or regulating function, which is difficult for a lot of us to get our heads around. But it actually has a biological component to it, where in fact, people who engage in the behavior often do feel soothed and have a biological endorphin change. Other times it's about self-punishment or communication to other people about what's going on. And sometimes non-suicidal self-injury is a behavior in and of itself independent of suicide. And other times it can co-occur with suicidal behavior. And in adolescence, sometimes we think of non-suicidal self-injury as sort of a gateway or a path towards more serious or prolonged forms of suicidal behavior. So now that we've got some of the terms in place, I want to talk about our current context, the context of the problem here. This came from the Young People's Mental Health Report, and I thought it really summarized where a lot of us are these days. This idea that the health and economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic, the changes in learning, missed milestones, and the racial reckoning in the United States have exacerbated an already significant existing mental health crisis. And that's frightening. What's important to know is that there are some protective factors at play. This is a quote from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, their chief medical officer. It's important for everyone to understand that suicide risk is complex and protective factors also play a powerful role. While we do not yet have national suicide data, from the full year of 2020, early data show that overall suicide rates declined or saw no change in 2020 compared with the previous year. This is further backed up with a study that was brought to press just recently in March, I think it was about the 16th, that indicated that in a study looking at suicide screenings in emergency departments in various parts of the country, that looking at the rates of youth screening for suicide attempts in 2019 and comparing that to the same month in 2020, that again, there was no consistent increase in reported suicidal ideation or attempts. So this is helpful for us to know that even though we're undergoing some monumental stressors and our kids are really struggling, it doesn't necessarily mean that our suicide problem is one that's even beyond what we've had to cope with. Now, unfortunately, the state of the problem is still significant. Over the last period of time between 2007 and 2017, the rates of suicide doubled for teen girls and tripled for girls between the ages of 10 and 14. And that's a pace that's far faster than what's happened with the increase for boys, but the increase is increasing. And the challenge here is that we're facing some significant risks. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death among 13 to 19-year-old girls. And that means that the first cause of death is unintentional accident, followed by suicide deaths. Third is malignant neoplasms, and fourth is homicide. So this is not a minor situation. What we need to pay attention to is that there's also some significant impact when we look at gender and when we look at ethnicity and race. And so there's different pockets of our kids that are more vulnerable than others, and our girls are one particular pocket. And I want to highlight that here I'm talking about girls in this talk, and the data are arrayed by gender assigned at birth or gender at birth. This doesn't mean that our trans kids or kids who are experiencing themselves not as the gender that they were born into aren't also seriously suffering. We want to pay attention to them and their data. It's just that the way the data is collected right now is really focused around what is the gender at birth. So what we know is that among high school girls, 24% seriously considered suicide and 19.9% had made a suicide plan. 11% have made a suicide attempt. And among our kids who are in that LGBTQI group, as much as 48% of them have seriously considered killing themselves. And they are 3.5 times more likely than their heterosexual peers to make a suicide attempt. And if they were transgendered, these teens were 5.8 times more likely. So this is a serious issue, and we really need to be mindful about the various kids that we're trying to help. In addition, non-suicidal self-injury is the 8th leading cause of non-fatal injury in our 13 to 19-year-old girls, with 24% of high school girls saying that they've engaged in one episode of non-suicidal injury, and many of them engaging in repeated episodes of suicidal injury. And this behavior, non-suicidal self-injury, often starts at age 13. So these are some significant factors for us to be mindful of, and yet, sometimes we don't see it. These are our girls, yet sometimes we're surprised. And this quote, I think, captured me. Behind my smile is a hurting heart. Behind my laugh, I'm falling apart. Look closely at me and you will see. The girl I am, it isn't me. So our girls often really, we're not seeing them. And so we need to be particularly mindful about what puts them at risk. And so I want to do a quick review of some of these key risk factors. And I know many of you are familiar with them, so I just want to hit some highlights. The first thing to know really is that even after 50, 60 years of research on the problem of suicide, as a science, we're still unable to predict better than chance. The single best predictor of who will commit suicide is somebody who's engaged in prior suicidal behavior. So previous suicide attempts are extremely important, as are suicidal thinking and non-suicidal self-injury, as both of those behaviors predict suicide attempt. Family history of suicide, both from a biological perspective as well as sort of a social learning perspective, is key. And knowing somebody even who has died by suicide increases risk. Given that we just said what a significant problem this is chilling. We also know that family discord, conflict and instability, stressors that our children face, significant loss. It could be the loss of a pet. It could be the loss of an important person in their life, their academic stress, social isolation, high, heavy, frequent screen time and social media use, as well as bullying and harassment. And for our girls, it really seems to be that the social media use increases the likelihood that they'll have a negative experience interpersonally and that they will feel more ostracized. And they can't get away from it, right? You know, the social media is there everywhere. And the bullying and harassment, interestingly, the risk here is both if your child is the victim of bullying and harassment, or if they're somebody who actually is engaging in that behavior against others. Both are risk factors for suicide. Having mental health disorders like depression, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress, eating disorders raises the risk. Alcohol use and substance use disorders. Alcohol is the more concerning problem in that alcohol accounts for more deaths than any other substance for our girls in this age group. And other sort of risky behaviors and disciplinary problems raise the risk for suicide. Things that we think of as psychological factors, you know, does your child have low self-esteem? Do they have a lot of hopelessness? Do they tend to get into negative thinking loops and have a hard time getting out? Are they particularly impulsive? Do they have a perfectionistic stance where it's all or nothing? Raises the risk of an impulsive suicide attempt. Do they have poor problem-solving skills? Do they have the sense that they are a burden? And is there stigma about asking for help? All of these things make our kids more vulnerable. Sexual orientation, but critically, it's not so much, it seems, about being homosexual, transgendered. It's more about that being somebody's experience and identity, but being in an environment that's not supportive. So we're going to talk about strategies to try to join with your kids and hear them and see them, even when it's difficult. And then lastly, and importantly, is a key risk factor is access to any kind of lethal means, whether it's firearms, medications, knives, things of that nature. So even if your child is exposed to a lot of these risk factors, hang on. There are some protective factors that are really important and can help to mitigate this petri dish of worry. So if your child has effective problem-solving skills, if you can help hone that, model it, teach it, that's a protective factor. If your child has a positive self-image, they have a sense of who they are and where they're going, spiritual life and faith, a sense of purpose and identity, a connection to family, a sense of closeness in the family, strong connections with peers and community connections, groups, activities, involvement in activities and hobbies. This is so challenging right now with the pandemic. And yet we're also finding that many of our youth are discovering new hobbies that they didn't even know were possible. And again, homes that have a restricted access to lethal means is a protective factor. So with these things in mind, what can you as a parent pay attention to? What are the warning signs? Well, listening for your child talking about suicide. Are they talking about death? Are they engaging in poetry or art or listening to music that really has a strong death, fatalistic, or suicide theme? Are they engaging in risky or destructive behavior? Are they driving recklessly? Are they disregarding usual safety behaviors? Are they isolating from their friends or from family? Are they talking about not feeling like they have any reason to live, that they have no purpose, or they're hopeless and they can't even see the possibility of the future? Are they talking in ways that communicate that they are feeling extreme guilt and shame, sometimes just for even taking up space or existing? Do they make statements that they think other people don't care about them, or would actually even think that they'd be better off if they were dead? Do you see changes in personality, things that are out of character? Now, I know some of you are thinking they're a teenager. There's constantly changes in personality. While this may be true, we're really looking at a change for a kid away from things that really have kind of defined who they are. If they've always been passionate about ballet, for example, are they now getting rid of their shoes, getting rid of their leotards and tights, and really not wanting to have anything to do with it? Is it really a marked shift from what's defined them? We know that teens are exploring and figuring out who they are, but is there something that's really marked and out of character? Are there changes in their eating habits, their sleeping habits, their concentration? Did they used to be an A student and now they have no interest in academics at all? All of this puts us on alert. And again, giving away possessions. Maybe they say goodbye to friends and loved ones. These are things that we want to be sort of awake to. Now, sometimes teens will tell us that they're suicidal. And there's often 3 reasons why they tell us that they're suicidal. One is that they are seriously considering killing themselves. And we need to take that very seriously. Depending on what study you look at, anywhere between 50% to 70% of people who attempt suicide have told somebody prior to doing it. Another reason why teens say that they're suicidal is that they're testing us. They're not intentionally testing us, but they're listening to see if you're listening. They want to know, what will you do? Do you care? Sometimes parents experience this as sort of teenage angst or being dramatic or overly dramatic, but often it's actually the child really just being so overwhelmed with emotion. They face real problems, these kids, and they're different than the problems that we faced. And sometimes they just don't know how to let us know, how to express just how overwhelmed, just how miserable they are. So really listening is important. The third reason that teens sometimes say that they're going to kill themselves is that they're actually trying to influence you. And sometimes parents feel as though this is a tactic, that it's a threat because they're not getting what they want. And sometimes parents feel manipulated. Now, I just want to highlight that simply because you feel like you're being manipulated doesn't necessarily mean that you are being manipulated. And manipulation sort of has a sense of malintent. Now, it is possible that kids are trying to get you to do something or trying to get out of something. And we need to listen for that. But all 3 of these, whether they're seriously considering killing themselves, they don't know how to express the degree of misery they're experiencing and some degree of teenage angst, or whether they're genuinely trying to influence you to get you to do something or not do something, we have to take it seriously. We absolutely have to take it seriously. The possible outcomes here. 1, you discover that your child needed help and you get them help and you save their life. Another possibility is that your child learns that you really are listening and can be counted on to help. The third possibility is that your child learns that you take suicide communication seriously and that you don't back down from that. And this is important because if, in fact, the behavior was designed to get you to do something differently, then taking it seriously, taking it more seriously than they intended for you to take it, can help to shape that approach to communication. We know that sometimes what our teens are looking for is time and attention from us. We also know that sometimes what teens are looking for is anything but time and attention from us. So if we throw ourselves in to the idea that any communication about suicide requires our attention, then we might just teach our child that suicide communication outside of a real crisis doesn't yield the outcomes that they're hoping for. And they might have a very serious life lesson about what happens when you talk about suicide. That they actually don't get the thing that they were asking for, the thing that they wanted to avoid, that instead they're talking with a mental health professional. And that absolutely might change their behavior over time. Now, I do want to highlight that depending on if you're working with a therapist about communication, you may at some point discover that your therapist guides you to not attend to everything. That's in a very special sort of situation where people are really paying attention to something that we call in the biz operant conditioning or operant reinforcement. But at the get-go, you want to pay attention to any communication of suicide from your child. So we went over what to do. Let's talk about what not to do. Critically, you will be flooded with emotions when you hear your child say something like this. Do not let the flight, fight, or freeze response shut you down. Don't let the fear or the shock or the overwhelm lead you to inaction. Even if you're 99.9% sure that this is angsty teen behavior, don't ignore it. Don't think it's a phase. Don't think they're going to grow out of it, because even if it's just that tiny 0.1%, I would much rather deal with that than have made the mistake and have a child die. And I think as parents, you all agree. Don't ignore it, even if you're sure that they're being overly dramatic or they're trying to manipulate you. Again, we talked about how a response that takes them away from what they were looking for and places them spending time actually having to answer questions about their mental health likely will be aversive enough that they might not use that strategy in the future. And lastly, don't let your own worries or concerns about wasting a mental health professional's time interfere with you taking them to the emergency department. So these are things we're thinking about in the context of when your child puts words to it. I'm thinking of killing myself. I'm going to kill myself. If you don't let me go to Marissa's house tonight, I'm going to take these pills. But sometimes our kids are silent. And when our kids are silent, we need to listen, because teens they're really adept sometimes at masking their feelings. And so we really have to listen. You're the parent. You have more access to your kid than teachers and coaches and even therapists. You really need to listen. And in DBT, what we call use your wise mind, meaning that you look at the facts and you listen to your emotions and then you act from there. So here are things that you can really listen for. Is your kid talking about wanting to die, be dead? Are they talking about suicide? Have they been doing any of that non-suicidal self-injury? Are they expressing things like, life's never going to get better? They're in terrible emotional pain. Do they express that somehow they feel like there's just something fundamentally wrong with them, that they're never going to be okay? Or is it just simply that your gut, your wise mind telling you that you're worried and that you need to take action? If something just seems off or doesn't seem normal, it's time to have a conversation. So how do you have conversations? I'm going to go over some strategies and principles from dialectical behavior therapy to help set you up to have these difficult to have conversations. So we'll go over each one of them so that you really have a little bit more depth, but we're going to look at principles from mindfulness about how to be present in these pivotal conversations. We're going to talk about strategies to keep communication open, even when it's difficult, and the importance of being direct when you talk about suicide. Okay, so how to support your teen. Be present. Now, keep in mind that teens are kind of like cats as opposed to dogs. They're not going to meet you at the door when you come home. Like cats, they're going to want attention, usually at a time that's not so convenient for you. And if you put too much attention on them, they're going to go away. And if you don't quite put enough attention on them, they're just going to walk nonchalantly on past you. And usually it's going to be at a time that's super inconvenient, like when you're trying to get something ready for a work presentation. So that means you've got to be present and you've got to be available and respond to the moment. So when your child gives you a little bit of an overture, see what you can do to really step back and throw yourself in. This is not the time to multitask. This is not the time to be doing your email and checking your phone. You really want to put it down and be present with your kiddo. You want to be able to attend to the moment, really the moment, without slipping into the past or leaping into the future, which is difficult to do if there's difficult topics to be discussed. And you want to really participate. You really want to be in the conversation and let your child kind of guide the way. Go where they go, follow where they go. Be prepared to listen and be prepared to ask questions. Keep the communication open. You really have to listen more than you talk, but use gentle encouragers, things like, tell me more. I'm interested, what were you thinking then? Avoid rushing to solve problems. Avoid glossing over problems or minimizing. Oh yeah, we all had the same problem when we were kids. Really kind of going slow in order to understand what's going on. It's important that in these conversations that you neither overreact or underreact. And keep in mind that when your kid is talking to you about things about their friend or their parents, their friend's parents' reaction, they're really looking at you and gauging your reaction. Sometimes this is practice ground to see how they might respond if they were to talk to you. What would you say? How would you react? Be empathetic and validate. Take a non-judgmental stance. And these are two that are particularly important, so I'm going to go over them in a little bit more detail. And then lastly, keep in mind that adolescence is not always the season in which our kids want to spend time with us, and be open if they want to talk, but they don't want to talk to you, and help to facilitate them connecting to another trusted adult, a family member or youth pastor or a teacher, somebody that they can actually open up and connect to. So one of these points that I said was so critical is being non-judgmental. So what does that really mean? Really means that we're trying to help your kid feel accepted and the sense that they can be themselves around you. And this is not as easy as it might sound. So steps to this are focus on the facts, stick to what you observe, keeping in mind that you can't observe another person's thoughts. You can't observe another person's feelings or their experience. It's tempting. And sometimes we can guess and be right, and I'll talk about a time where that's helpful. But if you really want to make sure that you're non-judgmental and you're fostering conversation, really try to stick to the facts and avoid making assumptions. Instead, asking for information, making sure that you drop judgmental words. Really try to replace judgmental words with descriptive words. So, you might have a person who says, I don't want to spend time with my friend Hannah because, she's really needy. Needy is often a judgment, like the person should not be the way that they are. And instead, we'd want to say, oh, okay, so you don't like spending time with your friend Hannah because when she's around you, she really wants a lot of your time. And it sounds like sometimes that's like more time than you want to give. So we're both saying the same thing here. It's just that needy often is judgmental and it's off-putting. It makes people want to shut down and not talk more. Whereas saying it non-judgmentally, just descriptively, often makes it easier to continue a conversation. Recognize that good and bad are just shortcuts. If I say, you're doing a good job, great work, that's just shorthand to say the activities that you're doing, if you'd like to get an A on your calculus test, that's on track, that's going to get you to your goal. It's wordy and it's long. But the thing about good and bad is that they're shortcuts. But if we use them over time, sometimes when we say good job, it means I'm good. And if we say, oh, I did a bad thing, over time, that can erode self-confidence and self-esteem because doing a bad thing so closely can become I'm bad. I did the bad thing and I am bad. And for our vulnerable kids, this can start the path towards that low self-esteem and some of that spiraling. So we also want to focus on thinking about how do we help kids get to their outcomes and looking at desired outcomes versus undesired outcomes, or what are things that they want versus things that they want to avoid. And that way we can get away from judgment and get back to what does it take to get to your goal? Because ultimately we're just trying to help ourselves and our kids get to goals. So these are tips for the non-judgmental stance. And then if you pair that with trying to be validating, meaning that you really work to say how you can hear and see and understand them, then we can really start to have a conversation. So validation is about verifying facts of a situation, just saying what is, and know that sometimes validation can be painful, yet helpful. So here's an example. I remember as a kid myself, I really struggled with math, and I was really scared I was going to fail calculus. Now, my mom, my biggest champion, she would say things like, oh, sweetheart, you're so smart, you're competent, capable, you can do anything that you set your mind to. Well, let me tell you, as much as I liked a cheerleader in my life, that did not help. It just made me panic. It made me think, oh my God, even she thinks that I can do this and I can't. How is it that she thinks that I can do this when I can't? And I can't. How come she doesn't understand? And years later, I got this point across to her, I think sometime after I'd gotten my PhD. I went back to her and I said, Mom, that was so hard. That just made me feel so panicked. She said, well, honey, what could I have said that would have been more helpful? And what I really needed to hear in that moment is, oh, okay. So the facts are that based on the points you've amassed, it's quite possible that you could, in fact, fail calculus. God, that's got to feel really devastating. That's got to be really kind of maybe scary even, because you're thinking, gosh, what will happen next? What can we do to help work on your math skills? How can I support you? That would have been much more helpful, because I knew then that she'd understand really where I was. So that's what validation is. It's really communicating to somebody that you understand, see, feel, hear where they are. As we say in the biz, the location perspective, the place at which they stand. So ultimately, it's all about expressing and understanding that person's experience, the things that are inside of them that you can't ever know for sure unless you ask. Validation helps to improve relationships because it shows that we're listening and really do understand. And that means we can actually have real closeness with our kids. It makes problem solving possible. You cannot even begin to solve a problem with somebody collaboratively if they don't even think that you understand it. I mean, just imagine if you had to solve a problem and your problem was all about how to get the groceries together to make dinner, and somebody said, oh, okay, I can help you with that problem. And they go out and they put gas in your car, as if that had anything to do with what your problem was. So this is really about showing that you understand so that you can be perceived as somebody who can be helpful. And some parents get nervous about validation. I can't agree with everything that they say. That's just not going to be right. It's not synonymous with approval or agreement with things that they're saying. It's just saying, I hear what you're saying. So you can completely disagree, and yet you can validate that you understand. You can say, this is really hard for me. I understand. I have a different view. And I hear that your perspective is ... So how do you validate? What do you do? Be present, listen, pay attention, work to remember what your kid tells you so that you can have that to bring up in context later. Reflect on what you hear and convey that you're really listening. Say back what you think you understand. Oh, okay, so there you were. I can see it now. You were standing in the hall at school, and that's when Josie came up to you. Oh my gosh, I can just see it now. Okay, and so then she said, da, 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 and you said what? So that you're really kind of hanging on the conversation with your child. Another thing you can do is mind read. Now, previously I told you don't make assumptions, and that is still true. And there are times where it's really powerful if you can sort of surmise what somebody is thinking or feeling based on how well you know them. So just think about the people in your life, and it could be your kid, but it could be your co-parent, it could be your partner, your spouse, it could be a best friend. Just think about the people in your life where you really feel connected, where they really get you. Often they can say things that are even before you put words on them. So there's a time and a place for that sort of guessing. It's just that we want to check it out and make sure that we're right, as opposed to making the assumption and acting as if it's true. We want to express that we understand the person, like how it makes sense based on experiences they've had in the past. Oh, I can imagine that when Steffi came up to you and said something to Jana about how would they like to get together with each other for the weekend, I can imagine, knowing that you've had a crush on Jana, that must have been really hard. I can only imagine how painful that might have been. So you're showing that you understand what it would be like based on how anybody would feel in that situation if they understood the facts and had walked a bit of the path that your kid had. And then lastly, you got to be genuine. I know that's sort of a strange thing to say to a parent, but sometimes I think parents get all caught up in their heads about trying to be the best parent, the perfect parent, the parent who knows what to say and do all the time. Be yourself. That needs to come through. Otherwise, your kid's going to look at you like you've lost your mind. So try to be the slightly more skilled, improved version of you, but you got to be you. All right, so we've got you being non-judgmental and we've got you validating. The next thing we got to do is to get you to think about a dialectical worldview. And by that, what I mean is just a few things to anchor you, that it really is the case that the world is filled with opposites, that there's always more than one way of seeing a situation or solving a problem, that everything and everybody is connected. You know, the waves in the ocean are one, and that change really is the only constant. Therefore, truth, there is no truth with a capital T. It's not that it's, relativistic. It's just that truth emerges over time as new facts emerge, as there's a new understanding. And just think of COVID-19 as an example. Remember how at the beginning of the pandemic, you could wear bandanas as a face covering. You didn't have to have a face covering. It's not that truth was static. It's that new facts came in and we all had to roll and change. Truth was emerging. We were all learning together. And that this change, that's the only constant, it's transactional, meaning nothing happens in isolation. So anything that happens with one person in a family, there's ripple effect, and that's not neither good nor bad, it just is. So with this philosophy, this worldview of dialectics, how do you put that into the relationships that you have with your family and your kids? One is that you take away but and you replace it with and. So, I really appreciate that you want to go hang out with your friends at the beach tonight for this bonfire. And that's going to be a hard no from me because there's not going to be any parents there to monitor. As opposed to, I understand you want to go to the beach and hang out with your friends, but that's not going to happen. The difference is that but often is a showstopper, whereas and says, I understand your side, and there's this other thing that we need to be attentive of. Another piece is that you have to ask yourself, how is it when your kiddo gets dug in on one side and you get dug in on the other? Why is there so much polarity? Where are you stuck? What's being left out? What's another way of understanding things? So that you can really learn how to connect and find similarities rather than differences. And that will ease the tensions and allow conversation to move forward. And this means that we're not fighting change anymore. We're accepting it. We don't have to necessarily like it. We don't have to approve of all things that change with our children, but we're recognizing that change is a fabric of the universe and that therefore to fight it is kind of delusional and will not make for effective conversations. And then lastly, remind yourself that everything is caused. And the only way to get change is that if you can figure out how to change the causes. And this helps to decrease that sense of intensity about having to fix things because it's very difficult to create that sort of effect. But looking for what needs to change to get specific outcomes, that's a path that you can walk more effectively. So with this foundation of dialectics, validation, and non-judgmental stance, in the context of suicide, you have to plunge in now and ask directly about suicide. You have to be matter of fact and convey that there's nothing that's too sensitive, that you can't discuss plainly, demonstrating that you can cope emotionally with difficult conversations and feelings, and know that it has been well researched that talking and asking questions about suicide does not plant the seed of suicidal ideas in a kid's mind, so that you can do what you need to do to help them. You can ask without that fear. And be ready. Some children will respond with indignation. How dare you think that that's what I would do? And other children just might dismiss it as, oh, mom, come on, give me a break. There could be some awkward silences, and it might be the beginning of a really important conversation. So now that you're prepped with sort of the how of doing it, what do you ask? Here are some questions that you can ask. And I've linked you with the website here to where you can get this question card for yourself, but it tells you exactly what you need to ask, the most important questions, and importantly, what to do based on the answers, so that you can move swiftly to get the help that your child needs, and or to get them towards a behavioral health referral. So now that you know how to ask and you know what to ask, what do you do? And some of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that sometimes it's our kids that are hearing about suicidal risk of other kids. And so I wanted to offer some advice that you can give your children, which is they need to listen like a true friend. They need to convey that they're worried about them. And critically, children cannot keep secret someone's suicidal thoughts, plans, or behaviors, that they must talk to an adult that they trust. And if they're talking with a peer and the peer has already engaged in action to kill themselves or harm themselves, then your child needs to really help hand that off to an adult who can be helpful and help to get that call to 911. So what about you? You as the parent, caregiver. Well, you need to be clear and ask, now that you've got the direct skills to do so, about suicide, intention, method, plans, and actions. Express your concern about what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Listen attentively and non-judgmentally. Reflect on what they share and let them know that they've been heard for real and that they're not alone. Guide them to professional help. Convey hope that things can change. And if you're talking to your child and they're already in the midst of action, then you need to get them to the emergency department or call 911. This is not a time to delay. So what if you are a parent of a suicidal teen? What's critically important is to get any kind of lethal means out of the house. And while gun locks and gun safes are important harm reduction measures, the research tells us that getting guns out of the house is even more important. 90% of suicide attempts that are involving a gun are fatal, while 4% involving a gun, one might be able to survive. So we want to get guns out of the house. We want to lock up medications or access to things that could easily be reached for suicide. You need to increase monitoring of your child, including social media and phones. And I know that this is a very difficult topic, but you are the person in control. They may have accounts that you don't know about. And if you're not sure how to monitor your child's accounts, talk with a friend, talk with a colleague, try to figure out how to monitor, because our suicidal youth need more oversight and care. You can help your child create a safety plan. These are things for them to pay attention to with you that are warning signs, strategies to de-stress, who are the trusted people that they can reach out to in their adult support network. And this is a website here where you can go and watch a video of how to do this kind of safety plan with your family. You can also help to reduce conflict and increase validation. You might need to get your own therapy to be able to do that effectively, or family therapy. Model effective coping. Show that problems can be solved, that things are not hopeless. Get support. Parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. And seek evidence-based treatment. Suicidal behavior can be effectively treated. And so it's important to find treatment that works. DBT is a treatment that works. It focuses on building lives that children find to actually be worth living. If you think about it, if you can help somebody build a life that they value, they have reasons for living, they have goals that they're working toward, then they're going to cherish and protect that life as opposed to not taking care for it. DBT is considered the frontline treatment at present for suicidal and self-harming youth. And this means that it's been studied in several different investigations and found to actually have efficacy as an intervention. DBT is particularly well suited to teens with dysregulated emotions who have poor coping skills and have problems like depression and anxiety disorder. DBT is a cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you've heard of that, DBT is a special application of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it includes teaching skills for effective coping and life management. And these same skills are also taught to the parents. And that's important because change happens in context, as we said earlier, thinking about dialectics. And to create a context where change can really take root means that both child and parent need to have the same set of skills to be able to help support one another. And parents need the skills to be able to regulate themselves because parenting itself is challenging, and parenting a suicidal child is epic. So the skills that are taught to, again, both teen and parent include mindfulness, in-depth training on how to be present in a particular kind of way, regulating one's attention to what is important in a given moment, skills to tolerate distress, to get through a crisis without making it worse, and how to radically accept painful moments in life, how to regulate emotion, how to down-regulate intense, overwhelming emotion when needed, and how to up-regulate if you're feeling flat or apathetic, and how to decrease sort of your baseline for being particularly vulnerable to emotions, which is sort of a rite of passage for many of our teens. There's so much biology and brain change happening that it's sort of amazing that they get anything productive done sometimes. And interpersonal skills. We know that families and teens need to be able to communicate effectively. I've given you a highlight of some of those skills from DBT in talking about non-judgmental stance, validation, and dialectics. And then lastly, self-management. DBT focuses on helping kids learn how to regulate and manage themselves so that they can be effective. So I want to close with a quote that's part of an open letter to somebody thinking about taking their life. And this is a quote from a gentleman named John Pavlovitz, who is a Unitarian pastor, a political and social writer, and does some youth counseling. And I thought his quote really said what we all need to think of as we talk about our girls. If they're suicidal, we want them to know to stay alive, hang on. We need them to know that they're loved. We need them to know that things will get better and that this is a plea that we make to them, and a promise, a dare, and an invitation. So with that, I will close and take the opportunity to try to answer some of your questions.
Dr. Korslund, I just want to thank you. And I also really want to just take a moment to thank parents for showing up, which has to be really difficult. And kudos to you. And I will dive into these questions because there are many. The first one being, what can you expect if you call 911?
It's a really good
Are they
question.
equipped?
Yeah,
Go ahead. You've got it.
It depends. It really depends on your community. If you communicate clearly and effectively that your child is in the midst of suicidal behavior or is at extremely high risk, what they're saying and what their mood, their demeanor, their actions are, the 911 dispatch will often send an ambulance to your home to help get your child to an emergency department. Unfortunately, some communities, depending on how much other requests for 911 services there are sometimes somewhat dismissive. And sometimes you need to, if you can safely get your child into the car, you can take your child to the emergency department yourself.
I think this next question is vital because so many other questions fall from it. How do I find a good qualified DBT therapist?
Yes. So there's a couple of ways to do that. One is that you can go to the DBT Linehan Board of Certification website, and you can just Google that and look for a certified DBT therapist. Now, DBT certification is still rarely, still kind of up and running in its infancy, so to say. So there are many highly qualified, well-trained people who have not yet moved all the way through their DBT certification. So the other thing you can do is you can look on websites that say that they offer DBT, and you can look to see if they are offering the skills training, the individual therapy, if they have a DBT consultation team. These are important things that identify whether or not they're really offering DBT. And then critically, you can call and interview them and ask them, how did they get their training? And what you're listening for is that they've actually been trained, including the opportunity for somebody to supervise their delivery of DBT, and not just that they went to a one-day workshop. Uh-oh, we've got static on.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Kids age 13 plus seem to have the right to 100% confidentiality, even when you take them to the ER. How can parents help when they don't know the full story and what to do?
It's maddening and it's scary. It's both of those things. I think what most therapists do is try to structure sort of a dialectical balance. So on the one hand, we need teens to know that the therapist has their back, that they really are working for them, that the alliance is strong. And at the same time, there has to be clarity and sort of some negotiation between teen and parent about, here are the no-goes. If you are amassing means to kill yourself, if you let me know that you in fact have pills, I am going to need you to tell your parent that you have pills and together to get rid of them. And if you're unwilling to do that, then I absolutely will violate your confidentiality, and I will let your parent know, because that is past my limits as a clinician to not take action. So most therapists, particularly DBT therapists, are working with the teens to say, hey, look, the content of your diary, who you're dating, who you have a crush on, let's negotiate the things that are absolutely between us because you don't think your parents can handle it, or that they will overreact, or whatever it might be. And here are the limits. And then on the flip side, letting parents know that therapists are universal recipients of information. We just might not share it back. So if you've got a concern, let me know about it. Just also recognize that if you tell me that you're concerned because you read their diary or something like that, that unless it's showing up in the therapy, I have no way to take action unless I out you. So we also have to sort of negotiate what information you share with me, how I can take action. And you can't stand protected on your side either. So there's some dialectical work that gets done early in treatment so that we can navigate that particular challenge of being here in Washington State.
Great. I'm going to try to put 3 questions together because we have a lot of them. So 1, do suicidal thoughts ever really go away? 2, what about talking to younger children who say, a 3rd grader, I'm mad at you, I want to kill myself? And then 3, can you talk a little bit more about the links between self-harm and suicidal thinking and behavior?
Okay, you might have to feed them back to me if I get lost. I'll start with the younger child. The same principles apply. One just chooses language a little bit more simply, a little bit differently, and really work to explore, what is it that you're thinking? when you say you want to be dead, or that you're mad at me and so you're going to kill yourself? Like, what's coming up with that? So a little bit more exploration to find out if the words that are being used mean the same thing that we understand them to mean. Do suicidal thoughts ever really go away? Yes, they can. So part of it is changing patterns of thinking. Suicidal thoughts often function as escape. And it's not that somebody is intentionally escaping, but sometimes when real world problems present, they're so overwhelming and you don't know how to change things, that it's easier to think about being dead because there's a moment of relief. And then it becomes a habit. And then it becomes suicide fantasies. So when you work to solve the problems that are driving somebody to want to be dead and therefore to think about ways to kill themselves, when you actually solve the problems, the function of the thinking goes away. And then the last one, I think, was a connection between non-suicidal self-injury and suicidal behavior.
Correct.
So what we know is that while the two behaviors are distinct, non-suicidal self-injury can serve the function of, regulation, self-soothing, communication. It also can be preparatory behavior for suicide attempts. And the very practice of the behavior makes somebody at risk. It's also possible that even though somebody's not intending to cause harm to the point of dying, that they cut too deep, they cut too many times, and that there's risk of death. So non-suicidal self-injury can be its own independent problem that requires targeted, directed intervention. And that's something that many treatments can do effectively, specifically DBT as the front line. And sometimes that behavior is completely independent of wanting to be dead, though sometimes it can look the same. So you can have a child who engages in cutting behavior, and sometimes it's purely for getting grounded in their body. Maybe they do something we call dissociate. They get kind of spaced out and it grounds them, kind of brings them back to reality. And other times they use the exact same behavior while they're thinking about being overwhelmed and not wanting to live anymore. And then it's a suicide attempt. So it's a complex pattern.
Thank you. I will make this the last question because you've been generous with your time. There are a number of questions related to teen and tween girls and the rate of gender confusion. And is it part of the pandemic? Is it like just asking for insights on almost every level of that question?
I think that's a question that's facing many parents. Parents are trying to find out, is it a phase? Is it a trend? Did they pick up the idea from a peer? Is it something that they're seeing because they're spending more time behind screens on the internet? The answer is we don't know. What we do know is that our culture is working to be more inclusive and accepting, and that allows for more dialogue. And so it's possible that, in fact, that children are finding that they can put words to things that they've been thinking and feeling. In other cases, it could be that children are exploring who they are. I think what we've learned as a science is that the notion of truly two categories of male and female is not as clear as we once thought, that there's really a lot more variation. And so it could be that we're learning more, that children are putting words to what they're experiencing in this era where those words didn't have the opportunity to be said in past eras. So the questions that all of you are asking are questions that the scientific community are asking too. What we do know is that children who do not feel as though they can say these things to family feel very isolated, ostracized. They feel ashamed within their skin about who they are as humans. And when that kind of shame arises, there's a real risk for suicide. So even if you don't understand it, even if you're afraid that by attending to it, you might reify it, work with your child to hear what are their thoughts, what are their feelings, listen non-judgmentally, and try to take in room for information so that they really feel like they can continue to talk to you about it.
Thank you. You are such a wonderful voice in support of families at such difficult and challenging times. Thank you. I just want to close with thanking our sponsors again, and Seattle Children's in particular, our presenting sponsor. And also to let people know that we have upcoming Saturday, March 27th. This is on the bright sunny side. Camps are opening. Our virtual camp fair is on Saturday, the 27th. So that's on the website. Check that out. And then Joe Langford is going to give a talk entitled The Rise of Cancel Culture, a talk for teens and parents on April 20th. And so that just got put onto our website. We hope you'll check that out as well. And just thank you all for showing up. And again, thank you, Dr. Korslund, for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks to all of you.
Good night.